Take a little trip with me, I'm gonna take you home.
Take a little history.
Take a little
down this lane of memories.
down this lane.
So let's raise another glass for the glorious past and the friends we have become. Yeah, yeah, 'cause little did we know the good times come and go, but the best is yet to come.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. How effectively and meaningfully has the government responded to the plight of the poor and vulnerable, some perhaps 400 million people? And how effectively and meaningfully has the government responded to the plight of the MSME sector, which represents 30% of GDP, 45% of manufacturing and possibly 50% of exports? Those are the two key issues I shall raise today with one of India's top economists, Professor of Economics at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Jayati Ghosh. Professor Ghosh, let's start with the announcements the Finance Minister made last evening about the poor and the vulnerable, who could be as much as 400 million people. And let's go through her announcements one by one. First, in March, when she announced that she was giving 500 rupees a month to 20 crore women with Jan Dhan accounts, and also 5 kilos of either rice or wheat for 80 crore people, plus 1 kilo of dal per family for 3 months, it was considered grossly inadequate. We've waited 50 days. She hasn't enhanced the amount. She hasn't extended the period. So as far as things stand, this is all going to come to an end in 6 weeks' time at the end of June. How disappointed are you?
I'm not just disappointed, I'm appalled. I mean, really, any sensible government would, at the time of announcing the lockdown, have announced that we will provide for those who are being rendered out of employment, and we will provide free food for 3 months. So we have calculated that if you gave 7,000 rupees per household for 80% of the population, and free food for 6 months of 10 kilos per person, you would only be spending 3% of GDP. If you gave even half that amount, you would be spending 1.5% of GDP. It could be so easily done if you really wanted to do it. None of that was done. The tiniest of amounts was offered, that too hardly reaching any of the people who were affected. We have seen the greatest humanitarian tragedy of my lifetime, watching these migrants walk home and dying on the way. And throughout this period, there has been no increase in any allocations that would affect their lives.
In fact, you were referring to the article you wrote for The Hindu yesterday, where you suggested, along with 2 others, that 7,000 rupees per month should be paid for 3 months, and you need to give 10 kilograms of food grain for 6 months. She's completely ignored that. But she also hasn't extended the minimal that she gave in March. That comes to an end in 6 weeks' time. And by not extending it, do you get the assumption that she perhaps believed everything will be okay in 6 weeks?
I get the sense that the government doesn't really understand the seriousness of the situation. We have the Minister of State for Finance saying that this economy is not going to be affected. They don't seem to understand that millions have been rendered destitute.
Is that bluff, or is that actually some form of ignorance?
I suspect that any government that realized how serious the problem is would have done something more than what they have done. Even I did not expect this complete inactivity.
There is one thing that the Finance Minister did do. She's recognized that some 8 crore people are not covered by the Food Security Act. They don't have ration cards, and as a result, they weren't getting the grain. She's now decided to give them 5 kilos of either rice or wheat per person for 2 months, and a kilo of chana per family. How much credit do you give her for at least accepting that there are 8 crore who had fallen outside the net completely, and for 50 days she did nothing about them? Now she's woken up.
Well, first of all, it's not 8 crore, it's at least 10 crore, according to the estimates by Jean Drèze and Ritika Khera. Secondly, she hasn't really said she's going to give it to anyone who needs it. She said those who are in migrant shelters of the central and state governments. Now, that doesn't actually add up to 8 crore. But if she's going to give it to everyone who needs it, then you should simply make it universal and have a basic allocation system, maybe something like an indelible ink when you collect your grain.
I noticed that you picked up on the fact that she said she's talking about people who are in shelter camps run by the states, but that was in answer to a question. It wasn't actually part of her statement when she was asked how she's going to identify these people. It's possible that that may not be her intent. if it is her intent to give it to anyone and everyone, but nonetheless cap it at 8 crore, are you still saying she's roughly 2 crore too short?
Oh, easily. Definitely 2 crore too short, possibly more. And remember that there are many people who were outside the NFSA, but who now today, because of the extreme economic circumstances, will need free grain. So I would say make it universal for anybody who comes. Do not exclude.
And again, for 2 months or for 6?
For 6.
Because at the moment she's capped it at 2 months.
It will be over in another 6 weeks for many people. And also, even the free grain that she's offering, she's giving it now for these so-called migrants only 5 kilogram free, whereas people under NFSA would also be getting another 5 kilogram that they would have bought.
So they're getting half of what the others get.
Exactly.
She hasn't even equalized them.
No.
Now, over the last 50 days of the lockdown, it's become very apparent that there are actually gaping holes in the government's delivery system. A study done by professors at Yale University establishes that perhaps as many as 170 poor women don't have Jan Dhan accounts, so they are not getting the 500 rupees. Kabir Agarwal, writing for The Wire but relying upon food security data, says that 200 million people haven't got the additional 5 kilos of food grain. And the Indian Express says that only 25% of the additional dal has gone to beneficiaries. Now, these are things that the government must be aware of themselves, because they're in the papers, the researchers picked it up. Yet she hasn't done anything so far to plug these gaps. And that means that even her minimal relief is not getting to people, but she doesn't seem to be worried about it either.
Yes, in fact, if you look at the government's own data, only 11 million tons has been lifted, have actually been delivered under all of the NFSA and the PM Garib Kalyan Yojana from the beginning of April to yesterday.
How much should have been lifted?
Well, according to them, they gave about 24 million tons in April and 26 million tons in May.
So out
for
of
the
50
Garib
million tons
well,
over 2 months, 11 has been lifted.
It has been actually delivered to people.
Which means 25% of what should have been delivered has actually been delivered. And this is as per government's own data.
That's right. It's from their own websites.
So they are well aware that actually in terms of delivery, her already minimal relief is not getting there.
That's right.
Your facts suggest it's only going to 25% of people it should go to.
I have to look at the exact amount, but yes, approximately that much. Well below what they have promised.
And yet she's suggested nothing to make us believe she's aware of this problem. She hasn't done anything to suggest she's remedying it. She's quite happy to continue in this way.
You know, the tendency of the central government has been to blame everything on state governments. They say, oh, well, it's the states, they're not doing what they should do. Whereas half the time, the grain doesn't even reach state governments.
But whether you blame the central government or the state government is a matter of politics and polemics. What matters is that the grain isn't getting to those who need it.
Yes, absolutely.
So at a critical moment, when survival is at stake, the government is aware that the grain is not getting to those who need it, and yet apparently, I keep underlining the word apparently, it's doing nothing about it. Or if it is, it's doing it in secret, not sharing the problem with us.
Well, it looks like they don't really care very much. That's my concern, because all these dreadful images we have seen of migrants, of people starving in the countryside, of people dying in the urban areas, doesn't seem to affect them, doesn't bother them. It's all about perception management and headline management.
She did say yesterday that those images of migrants walking back had made her heart stop.
I wish it would open up her purse strings rather than just stop her heart.
Let's come at this point to NREGA. Now, in the article you wrote for The Hindu yesterday, you called for the 100-day cap on work to be completely removed.
Yes.
And people allowed to work for as much time and for as many days as they need or want.
Yes.
But the finance minister has ignored that bit of your advice completely. However, the finance minister did say that during the 2 weeks of May, there's been a 40 to 50% increase in the number of people availing of NREGA. In contrast, The Hindu on the 30th of April reported that during the month of April, the number of people availing of NREGA had fallen by 83% and was the lowest in 5 years. Now, these to me are completely polar opposite and contradictory facts. How do you reconcile them?
These are not, well, she's basically chosen a base that would suit her. If you take the period from the 1st of April to the 12th of May, then work under NREGA is 30% of what it was last year. So it's 1/3 of what was last year if you take the period from the beginning of April to the 12th of May. Now, that really means that there was a collapse in April and there's a little bit of a recovery now. But this is the period when there was most demand, was actually when there was nothing provided.
So even if the finance minister is right in claiming that in the 2 weeks of May, 40 to 50% increase has taken place in people using NREGA, it doesn't deny the fact that in April there was a decline of 83%, and that means for the first 5 weeks of the lockdown, there was a huge collapse in NREGA work, which means people dependent on NREGA were not earning money and not getting fed.
And if you see what the law says if you do not provide employment when people have asked for it, you should pay unemployment insurance.
And that didn't happen either.
Nothing.
So right through the first 5 weeks, the Hindu proves that in fact the most needy who want NREGA didn't get it, they got no money, presumably they starved.
That's right.
I mean, I hate to use that word,
Yes.
but that is the logical outcome, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Hungry to the point of starvation.
That's right, and we can see evidence of it everywhere.
Now, the finance minister yesterday evening announced 2 further measures that are intended to help migrant workers in particular. First, she said portability of ration cards would be roughly 83% complete by the end of August and 100% complete by the end of March next year. And secondly, she said the government is considering, or in fact more than considering, is going ahead with a affordable rental accommodation scheme. Now, no doubt these are welcome, these are desirable, they're needed, but in the middle of a crisis when survival is the matter, how helpful are these?
Well, first of all, portability is a process that has been happening for the last 2 years. So she just announced something which has been ongoing. It's desirable, it's good, but it's
she's
nothing
given
new.
it an end date now.
Well, that doesn't really matter. It had to end, right? The process had to end. It has been going on for 2 years. It would have ended anyway. And this idea of enabling rental facilities in urban areas is also good, but it will take several years to actually implement it carefully. What is happening right now? What are you doing to prevent people from losing where they are living immediately because they cannot pay rent? What are you doing? That's why cash transfers right now are essential. And I would say it's also basic justice, because you are the ones who have deprived these people of their livelihood. You are responsible for ensuring that they have enough to live on.
So what you're saying is portability is a good idea, affordable rental accommodation is a great idea, but at the moment, when people don't have cash, when they don't have anywhere to live, you need immediate answers to immediate problems.
Exactly.
These are medium-term or semi-long-term issues,
Yes.
not solutions to a crisis of the moment.
Exactly, yes.
Let's come to something else that the finance minister covered in the announcement she made yesterday. She said that there would be interest subventions for Mudra Shishu loans, and she also spoke about credit guarantees for street vendors as well as for a whole range of poor farmers, except that those farmers have to first get Kisan credit cards, which could take a while. How meaningful is this?
So the Mudra scheme, I hesitate to call it a bit of a joke, but it is definitely not a success. A large part of these, because banks were just encouraged to fill quota, have been given to various people without thinking. Many of them are turning into bad loans. There's going to be very little in terms of genuine economic activity created from these loans. And most of them are going to be bad loans anyway.
So the subvention is meaningless.
It's hardly going to make any difference.
Because these loans are likely to be defaulted upon instead.
Yes.
Which I believe, in fact, many economists have already pointed out to the government.
Before the pandemic, it was well known that most of these Mudra loans are not going to be ever repaid.
What about the credit guarantees to poor farmers? I know that they're dependent in many instances on 2.5 crore farmers first getting Kisan credit cards, and that will take a while. But when that is done and they get that credit, will it be meaningful?
If it were accompanied by a whole range of measures, but on its own, it is nothing. It's really too little, too late, and too minor.
She did say that there would be more measures for farmers. They might happen on Friday evening or Saturday. So presumably there is more for them that's planned.
Well, we keep waiting for these more measures and then they all turn out to be damp squibs.
So the value of the credit guarantee extended to farmers depends critically on what else she does.
That's right.
If she does other steps that are meaningful, this credit guarantee will become valuable. But if she doesn't, it's just an announcement and nothing more.
Yes.
There is one measure that struck me as particularly novel, even innovative, and I want to ask whether you applaud it. And that was the proposal to create a 6,000 crore scheme for employment for Adivasis and tribals in what she called forest-related jobs, forest management, forest protection. How did you respond to that?
First of all, why are we not expanding the employment guarantee properly into the Adivasi areas? What has stopped us from doing that? That's an employment-related scheme. I'm a little concerned about what this really means. Is it going to mean effectively land transfer, and where you put people to work on what were earlier their own lands? Because she did say it was going to be public-private partnership. And I must say those words in India today always send a chill up my spine, because too much of that is actually the public protection of large corporates and enabling them to actually exploit both resources and people.
But your main concern, if I understood that answer correctly, is why didn't she extend the NREGA scheme to Adivasi areas rather than create a special plan for their employment?
Well, it officially exists, but it's not being properly implemented in those areas. So she should have actually expanded the NREGA scheme.
In other words, this is covering up for a lapse. The lapse being not extending NREGA or not implementing it.
Yes.
She's covering up for it with a new scheme.
Yes.
And therefore, what she should have done was implement what she's obliged to do by law rather than create an alternative for it.
And I would say, if they were really meaning to do something for the people, expand NREGA and extend it to all adults and stop the limit of the number of days.
Let me end this part by asking you, how do you explain to yourself the fact that this government has not done more for the poor and vulnerable? We're talking about possibly 400 million people. That's 1/3 of India's population. And many of these would have been people who would have probably voted for BJP and Mr. Modi in 2014 and 2019. And yet now, in their hour of desperate crisis, this government has almost literally turned its back on them.
You know, if you had asked me whether this could happen in India even 2 years ago, I would have not believed you. I cannot still believe that this is happening in a democracy, because I cannot imagine that a democratically elected government would be so unresponsive to the needs of ordinary people who, as you say, probably voted them, but even if they didn't, are nonetheless their constituents. So I'm amazed that there has been complete inaction in terms of the things that would really affect them. I think the fear is that they don't want to run a large fiscal deficit. But this is macroeconomically stupid, because the less they spend, the more GDP will fall, and they will have a larger deficit as a share of GDP.
But your main point in that answer is that you could not have believed even 2 years earlier that a democracy would treat its people in this way.
Yes.
You're absolutely shaken that an elected government responsible to the people is behaving so irresponsibly.
I still find it unbelievable.
Can I end this part by putting the opposite to you? What do you make of the fact that these are people who've been pushed to desperation, destitution and hunger? Pranab Sen in an interview to me in March said there will probably be food riots. We've seen nothing of the sort, no violence, nothing. Instead, these people have literally turned around, accepted their fate and are walking back to their villages. How do you respond to that? Anywhere else in the world, you'd have said, you'll have a riot, you'll have maybe a revolution. Not here. They've just accepted their lot and they're going.
I think, you know, what is the failure is, of course, of the government at different levels, but there's a terrible failure of the elite and middle class. Our ability to not be moved by this and to say, well, oh, it's happening, but, you know, it's true, we're all right. I think that is also part of the overall indictment.
We too have let down these people.
Absolutely.
People like you and me. Yes. We sit in our drawing rooms and we talk about them over a drink, but they are pictures on a television screen. Yes. We have no idea what it's like being in their shoes, destitute and hungry, with no option but to walk thousands of miles to Katihar or wherever.
And for 12-year-old girls to walk for 3 days and then die just before reaching home. And children, tiny toddlers being carried on bicycles. I mean, it's beyond appalling.
Let's take a break at that very depressing point. I want to come back and talk to you about MSMEs and whether the government has acted either effectively or meaningfully to protect them. But first, a message from our sponsor, Livelihood, whilst I take a sip from this glass.
Take a little trip with me, I'm gonna take you home.
Take a little history
Take a little
down this lane of memories.
down this lane.
So let's raise another glass for the glorious past and the friends we have become. Yeah, yeah, 'cause little did we know the good times come and go, but the best is yet to come.
Welcome back to a special interview for The Wire. My guest is one of India's foremost economists, Professor of Economics at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Jayati Ghosh. Professor Ghosh, let's come to the steps the Finance Minister announced on Wednesday to help MSMEs, who represent 30% of GDP, 45% of manufacturing, and perhaps 50% of exports. Now, she's put together a package of collateral-free loans and credit guarantees amounting to 3.7 lakh crore. In your eyes, is this an impressive response or an inadequate one to the crisis MSMEs face?
I think it's an embarrassing response. First of all, the government and various public sector enterprises owe MSMEs 5 lakh crore. Why don't they just begin by repaying what they owe them? You don't have to then worry about guaranteeing credit for them. Just repay what you owe the MSMEs. That's significantly more than what she has offered as a credit guarantee. Second, the real problem today for all of these enterprises is the complete absence of demand. There is no one to buy their products. You have to actually bring demand back in the economy, which means putting money in the hands of people who will buy their product.
I'll come to demand in a moment's time, but the Finance Minister did say on Wednesday that the dues that were owed would be paid in 45 days. You don't think that adequately covers the 5 lakh you're talking about?
I'll be very delighted to know that they will pay these dues, if they're actually going to do that.
You think it's just rhetoric and nothing more?
Well, we've had a lot of rhetoric in the past, haven't we?
And these dues are long owed. And first of all, they shouldn't have been dues, they should have been paid.
Exactly. I mean, despite everything, there's been nothing even about repaying the state governments what is owed to them.
Beyond paying the 5 lakhs that are owed to MSMEs and paying it immediately, are there other steps she should have taken which she didn't, which would have helped MSMEs?
The first, as I said, is to actually bring demand into the system by putting money in the hands of people who will buy things, which means NREGA, which means an income transfer, which means other kinds of things that will just allow demand to recover. Second, you have to actually transfer money to the state governments. They're the ones who understand the problems of MSMEs. They're the ones who are dealing with them on a daily basis.
And the state governments have been crying for simple things like increasing their borrowing limits from 3 to 5% of state GDP. And apparently in the case of Amit Mitra, because he told me this, he's written 8 letters to Nirmala Sitharaman and they've been ignored.
Yes. Every finance minister, certainly the opposition ministers, will tell you the same thing, that nothing ever actually gets responded to.
So you're saying 3 things would have been essential to revive MSMEs, which she hasn't done. 1, pay their dues to them, pay them immediately because we're talking of 5 lakh crore.
Yes.
Secondly, you're saying revive demand across the country,
Yes,
because that's a second and perhaps more guaranteed way of helping
yes,
MSMEs. And the third is give money to states which they're asking for, increase their borrowing limits, because it's at the state level that a lot of the work has to be done.
Also pay the states what you owe them. 30,000 crore you still owe them.
And if all these 3 had been done, would it have been a better way of tackling the MSME crisis rather than this extension of collateral-free loans and credit guarantees?
I think what has been announced 2 days ago is not going to do anything. So it's not just a question of better. The other one does nothing, this one might do something.
But you really mean that what she announced will do nothing? That's not just rhetoric on your part?
No, it's not, no.
Literally nothing.
The package for MSMEs is not going to do anything at all.
Let me put to a view that was said to me on Wednesday evening shortly after she made her announcement about MSMEs. I was told this is a survival package, not a revival package. This will just about keep MSMEs afloat because it's giving them a way of paying their rent, their electricity, and if they still have some staff on their rolls, giving salaries. But MSMEs are not going to start economic operations until there's a proper fiscal stimulus, which is missing.
Well, exactly what I was saying, that you need demand. But it's not even a survival package. Even these, the credit guarantee and so on applies to those MSMEs who are completely in the green, who haven't got any due loans, and who now want to take on fresh loans. 20% of that is being covered. That's not enough even to survive in a situation where all your demand is just gone.
You're right in saying that the amount may not be enough even to survive, but isn't there even a prior problem? The guarantee that she's given may be sufficient for banks to overcome their risk aversion, but what's the guarantee that MSMEs in this situation will actually want to borrow? First of all, I presume they'll wait to see a revival of demand, and secondly, they are aware, even more than she is, that once the 1-year moratorium is over, they not only have the interest to pay, but they'll have the capital to repay. And in the present situation, they may not be confident enough of adding this burden to their shoulders.
I certainly wouldn't. If I were running an MSME, there is no way I would take additional borrowing today, simply because I have absolutely no idea what my market will be in 3 months.
And then there's a further problem, I suppose, that MSMEs face. Most of their workers have gone back to their villages, and who knows when they'll return. And secondly, if they do get workers, they have to enforce very strict social distancing norms, and for many SMEs, that is just impossible.
Yes.
So again, given these conditions, will MSMEs actually want to function? We're facing not just an existential crisis created by the lockdown, but on top of that, there is a loss of confidence.
Yes.
And then finally, there's the social distancing requirement that makes functioning impossible.
Yes.
So will MSMEs actually ever get back onto their feet?
Certainly not with the current package. The current package is not helping them at all, from what I can see. What we had suggested in our article yesterday is that we should actually expand the employment guarantee to urban areas as well, and use part of that to subsidize workers in MSMEs.
Except that in this present financial constraint and crisis, can the government take on something as ambitious as an urban employment guarantee?
It's only in a crisis situation like that that these kinds of ambitious programs have emerged in the past and that are meaningful. And if not now, then when?
So you're saying
many other governments are spending so much.
Crisis is the mother of invention. Use this crisis to do something you should have done earlier.
And if you cannot actually justify your existence in a crisis like this, then you shouldn't be there.
Let me put this to you. There's one other measure that she had for the MSMEs, and that is a redefinition of what it means to be an MSME. And this is going to be a result of raising investment limits as well as a result of raising the maximum turnover. And alongside that, she's also said that there'll be a bar on global tenders for orders under 200 crore. And on paper, this means opportunity for MSMEs is increasing, and they can continue to benefit from being small, even though they're growing bigger and bigger. But again, isn't this a sort of medium or long-term offer? In a crisis, will it help?
Well, again, this is something that was in the works and is done periodically, where the limits are raised on what you define as an MSME and so on. So this is just part of the normal course. The measure to actually, encourage people to buy local, again, it's the kind of general thing. These are not emergency crisis measures. These are not things that are dealing with the enormity of the catastrophe that we face.
So when it comes to actually being effective and meaningful in tackling the crisis MSMEs face, you're saying to me or suggesting to me, there's a lot of rhetoric.
Yes.
There's a lot of talk about things that will take a year or 2 or 3 to happen. But in terms of tackling immediately an emergency crisis, there was very little focus.
Yes.
So she's let down the MSMEs.
Oh, absolutely. And I think many of them recognize that. In fact, I think everyone is recognizing that, because we've seen that even the stock market hasn't really responded very well to this. These are not measures that will revive the economy. These are not measures that will pull us out of this very, very deep economic hole.
In which case, my last question, look down the road for 6 months. What sort of future do you see for MSMEs?
I would rather not. It is very, very bleak. Unless we have a dramatic shift in strategy, and unless we have a government actually putting money where its mouth has been extensively, we are looking at an unbelievable disaster for MSMEs and for the people of the country.
Professor Ghosh, on that very somber note, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.